Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed working with namespaces. We're on inside of our module pattern towards anonymous closures. So far, we have only seen a module that has public properties. The thing with the namespace, though, is that you really have to hope that no one else ever uses the name you've created for your namespace inside your application. Take a look at this Armory object right here. The Armory namespace we can infer because of the capitals. Now this namespace has a bunch of public variables and methods which can still be accessed by any code that happens to know the name of the space and its properties. What if we don't want that? What if we want some privacy to our data inside our namespace? First, we need to decide which properties should be public and which we don't want anybody to see and should be private. So taking a look at these, we've got a weapon list and an armor list. And since an accurate list of weapons and armor is really, really important, right? To accurate armory service, I mean, when you run your armory, I'm sure that that's what you need. These arrays should be very private. Rolling on down, you see make weapon request and make armor request. Well, that seems to be something that should be public because the whole reason an armory exists is because we want people to be able to make requests to get weapons and armor out of the armory, right? And then finally, remove weapon, remove armor, replace armor. That's really messing with our data, with our lists, right? So we probably want these to be private as well, because making any modifications to the master list should be a task that only the module takes care of, and only the module can call into being. This is an excellent case of how public methods and values often and sometimes should be triggering the use of private methods and values. So in our case, our public methods are going to signal the private methods to safely modify the private data. Here you can see each request method, meaning make weapon request and make armor request, each of those is going to make some reference in its code to the remove replace weapons. Those are going to have access to the weapons and armor lists. That makes closure very valuable. Let's see how. The closure feature in JavaScript, which you may remember from JavaScript Road Trip, has a feature that will allow us to privatize properties. As a first visual step, check this out, we'll wrap the entire set of properties in an anonymous, immediately invoked function expression. Stay with me on that. So what we got here is function at the front, but notice it's wrapped inside of a left parentheses. And then at the back, we close that left parentheses with a right parentheses, and then immediately call the function by providing another calling set of parentheses. This is an immediately invoked function expression, which you probably saw or remember from Road Trip. Now we will turn all of our desired private properties of the old Armory namespace, we're going to turn those into local executable code inside our new function, right? And those local values and methods that now belong to the function will be closed up into the Armory's namespace once the Armory object gets returned. Here, the lists of data become local variables for the immediately invoked function expression's scope. That's going to make them private. We'll do the same thing for these function expressions down at the bottom, remove weapon, remove armor, replace armor. We want all those to be private, so we're going to make those local executable code as well. Again, these will belong only to the function instead of directly to the namespace. Stay with us. Next thing you should probably do, although it's not really required, it's just good habits, is to pull every private value and method to the top of the function. That's going to help us with code organization, and it's going to put all the closure values near the top and near each other for easy reference. So let's scoot those over. And here is where the money is. In order to make some of the properties public, which is obviously our remaining ones, we're going to return an object that holds those properties. So let's add those public properties to their own object and return it, and that becomes the Armory namespace once the immediately invoked function expression finishes and returns. What you can see is that once the function completes and returns that object, it will be immediately handed over to the Armory variable and become the new Armory namespace, complete with public properties, make weapon request and make armor request, as well as all of that private data that no one will ever see. What we want you to notice about this really powerful element of the module pattern is that the closure now produces all of your desired private methods and values. All of the function's local variables get pushed, get bound down into the returned object, into that scope. But those properties are never actual properties within the object itself. They're there though, and they're visible to and able to be referenced by only the members of the object's local scope. And with that, the basics of our module are actually now complete. Our sensitive data is private by closure, and our public properties are accessible through only the namespace. So now, if we call armory.makeWeaponRequest on the weapon Excalibur, well, the armory namespace, which is that small object there, calls its makeWeaponRequest property method. Next, makeWeaponRequest will call removeWeapon, which is invisible, in order to try to get Excalibur. Next, if some conditions are met, namely if the weapon exists in the weapon list and if it should be checked out to the person who's making the request, then the invisible removeWeapon method deletes and retrieves the object from the invisible closed-up weapon list. Weapon list returns that object to the removeWeapon function scope. Then, of course, removeWeapon will return that object for use to the scope of makeWeaponRequest, and then the armory namespace can decide what to do with Excalibur. Short and sweet, that's anonymous closures, and now we will give you some experience with those in the challenges. See you back for the next section.